Welcome to episode 75 of the Filmmakers podcast. This is Jamie Benning talking to you from my house here in the UK. It's May 2023. This is the first episode of the month. If this is the first time you've listened to the podcast, welcome. You have about an hour or so of film history chat ahead of you. Please do check out the previous 74 episodes. They're all great if you love behind the scenes chat. And each of them, I would say, gives you a unique insight into the film industry and the roles within, including directors, writers, editors, visual and special effects artists, sound designers, behind-the-scenes documentarians. There's lots to choose from and hopefully lots to learn. If you're a regular listener, thanks as always for your continued support. If any of you do like my work, then please visit patreon.com/Jamie Benning. There are several tiers for you to choose from with different perks and merch too. And thanks to those of you that are supporting the podcast. It really does mean a lot to me. Talking of merch, you can also support the podcast by buying some Filmmakers goods, including mugs, t-shirts, bags, bottles, and even socks. There are t-shirts with Inside Jaws and Inside Jabber posters on them. You know, you could buy one for your next film convention. And I keep saying this every episode, but nobody has bought anything from the shop yet. So you'll probably be the first and maybe the last if you do buy something. But I'd appreciate your support via that means. There's some pretty cool stuff on there to be had, and, you know, just show proudly that you're a member of the Filmmakers podcast family. All of that can be found at filmmakers.creator-spring.com. I'll post the link to both the Patreon and this merch link in the show notes. If you're interested in our Return of the Jedi unauthorized timeline book that Justin Berger and I are putting together, please visit jeditimeline.com and click the link to register your interest. The book will be released on the 40th anniversary of the film. That's the 25th of May this year, 2023. The book will contain the most comprehensive collection of dates on all things Return of the Jedi, including all stages of production, game and toy releases, screenings and home video releases. It also exclusively contains new photographs of the Kenner line of toys taken by Kim D.M. Simmons, the man who shot the original toy photographs. Check out his soon-to-be-released book as well at themanwhoshotlukeSkywalker.com. And I can now exclusively reveal that we'll have an extended introduction in the book from Jim Bloom, associate producer on The Empire Strikes Back and co-producer on Return of the Jedi. We also have a photo from Jim that has not been published anywhere else. Jim, you know, we asked Jim Bloom after I did my interview with him for this podcast. I said, look, we're making this book. We'd love to have an introduction from you, you know, maybe 300 words or something. And he's written nearer to 1,500, and it's great. It's like a real nice insight into, you know, what it was like to be working behind the scenes making that last episode of the original trilogy. And as they say, it doesn't stop there. We also have never before seen diary entries from two members of the crew, namely Dave Barkley, Jabba and Yoda puppeteer, and John Coppinger, animatronics engineer on Jabba. Both Dave and John very kindly offered us their diaries that they'd kept during the production. And you'll see them in our book for the first time. An exclusive. So we really have dialed in on trying to find out as much information as we can based on the day-to-day of the production, as well as all the things that came before and after. We'll also have a special episode of this podcast with Jim Bloom and Justin Berger, my co-author, as the second episode of this month. We're recording that in a couple of days, just after the weekend here. So look out for that. Because we're self-publishing on Amazon, we're not doing an ebook. We're doing a printed physical book. You know, we both love having physical books. It does mean that Amazon does not allow you to have pre-orders. But as I said, you can register your interest. So fill in the form at jeditimeline.com and you'll get an email to let you know how and where to buy it on the day of release on the 25th of May. For those of you that have already registered your interest, please remember to check your junk mail folder to confirm your interest. Otherwise, when we send the email, it will probably just end up in your junk folder again. And there are about 50 of you currently that have not confirmed. So do check your junk mail folder just to let your software know that this is not junk mail. And then you'll get that notification on the 25th. Otherwise, keep your eyes on social media at JamieSWB on Twitter, Filmmakers on Instagram and on Facebook, and we'll be releasing some details about the book. We're doing a bit of a social media campaign at the moment, something every day about Return of the Jedi. So look out for that and look out for the release date. We'll be revealing a few sample pages and things leading up to that as well. I should add this is very much a labour of love for Justin and I. The self-publishing model on Amazon means that the corporate behemoth takes an enormous amount of money. Our profits are minuscule at best, and given the time we've taken to make the book, I doubt if we'll ever break even. There will be 3 versions of the book available for different budgets, and we've priced them so that we're making, very minimal profit, because otherwise the price just gets too prohibitively large. But the first one is the full color throughout book in hardback. Then there's a fully color book in softcover, and thirdly there's a color cover version but with black and white interior. That's the cheaper of the 3. The prices differ from region to region, but it'd be about $30 for the black and white, $50 for the full hardback edition. As I said, we're making single figure profits on these as we've priced them as near to cost as we can to ensure that you've got the money to buy them and you're not spending too much. But we're not a big publisher. This is print on demand, and print on demand via Amazon costs a lot of money, but it is the easiest way for us to get them out to you. So thanks for your support and understanding, and let's crack on with what this episode is about. So for episode number 75, I spoke with filmmaker and optical VFX expert Peter Kuran. Peter was one of the few people employed by George Lucas for Star Wars, and he went on to have a long career in VFX and then became a director in his own right. I should point out that throughout the interview we had internet problems, so some of the recording is garbled, some of it's lost. I've edited round it in places and left it in other places so you know that there was a piece missing. Apologies, we never found if it was my connection or Peter's. But anyway, it's still a good conversation and I hope you enjoy it. So here is my conversation with Peter Kuran, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Peter, where did it all begin for you? You were born in New Jersey, is that right? But where did that spark first come for your love of being involved in movies?
Well, I think originally, if I go back really far, I was interested in astronomy first. And I think somewhere around the 3rd grade, my teacher was tired of me writing things about astronomy and suggested I do something else. And she suggested football, and I really wasn't interested in football. So I started getting interested in photography, then film and special effects. I had this book by Raymond Fielding on special effects, and it was really fun to go through it and see all of the different types of equipment that was used, that I wound up using, and that has absolutely no use anymore to anybody.
But did you have a Super 8 camera when you were a kid, or 8mm camera that you would make these things on?
Yeah. Right. First I started with my grandfather's camera, which was a double 8mm camera. When you had to turn, I think you got maybe a minute or so out of the footage, and then you turned it over, and then you ran the other side. The 8mm camera had the ability of doing, you could wind it back and double expose things over it. I also had a Super 8. That was what I got. I eventually got a Super 8 camera, but you can't wind Super 8 back very easily. There are ways of doing it, and you can really screw up the cartridge. But and then somebody actually, a friend of my mom's, gave me one of these little 16mm cameras and a 16mm projector. Now the 16mm camera, it's a little thing. It's originally the history of that type of camera started in World War II. They were called Gazap cameras, for gun sight aiming point cameras, and they're little, and they would go into the fighter aircraft, and whenever the pilot depressed his firing button, the camera would take frames so that hopefully they got back okay, and they could look at their film and see what went right and what went wrong. But
I didn't realize that. Interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things about the history of film. For instance, from a technical standpoint, the photography, when when photography first started a long time ago, um, the I mean, it was black and white, but it was blue sensitive only. The original black and white films were blue sensitive only, and that is one of the reasons that some of the old time movies, they'd wear pancake makeup, because being blue sensitive made your skin very dark. Since that's why they used to use blue in blue screen. Because there's not a lot of blue in your skin tone, and it would make it very dark. And then Kodak and the other film manufacturers came up with dyes that they would add to the black and white film and make it blue and green sensitive, which is what they called orthochromatic. And then eventually they pushed it even further to get red, green, and blue, and some infrared, but that led to panchromatic film. So that's the history of black and white film. I hope I didn't put you to sleep.
No. It's this is the great thing about doing this podcast is I hear things that I've never heard or read before. So that's great. But where did you kind of begin your journey, sort of entering into the industry? When did you graduate high school? Was that mid-70s?
Yeah, I graduated 1974, and then came out to California from New Jersey, 75s, 70, well, for about a year and a half. And I went to CalArts, California Institute of the Arts, which is in Valencia, California. And I got on a work study program, which at Disney, because I wanted to go there because of Disney had an interest in CalArts, and I got to go on a study program at the Disney special effects department, optical effects department.
So was there a path there? Was there, if you went to CalArts, there was potential that you could end up working for Disney?
Possibly, yeah. Well, I mean, actually, the interesting thing is that these were really the old guys. I'm not sure after their department finished, if after they were all retired, I think there wasn't a lot of that optical department left. But actually, I think maybe Harrison Ellenshaw had a lot to do with that. He was working there when I first visited the place. I don't think they have an optical department anymore, I'm sure.
No, well, I think in those days, kind of, well, I guess the 70s, we're talking about the coming of independent cinema and a move away from those kind of big, spectacular epics that would have been required to use opticals. But then of course, comes along George Lucas, not only into everybody's lives, but into yours in particular. How did that come about?
When I mentioned at first that book by Raymond Fielding on special effects, I visited Temple University first because I had heard that he was a teacher there. And I went and visited, and I said, boy, I have your book. I've read it forward, backward a million times. And I really want to get into the special, visual effects. And he said, well, there's no work. You won't find any work. And I suppose if I lived in Pennsylvania at the time, I wouldn't have found any work, but decided I didn't want to go to school there because he was kind of bringing me down on the whole idea of getting interested into special effects. So that's why I went out to CalArts, and I think I just happened to hit it at the right moment.
Yeah. And how did you hear about this young filmmaker who just made American Graffiti? How did you hear about the fact that he was making this new film?
Well, I was going to CalArts, and I think I was probably one of the few people, if any, that was interested in special effects, like blue screen and things like that. Now there was animation department, experimental animation, live action, but nothing that specifically was about visual effects. But there were optical printers and animation cameras and lots of equipment to be able to work with, all the equipment I'd seen in Raymond Fielding's book. But then this guy, Michael Ross, who had gone to some of the classes I had gone to, he had originally gone to get a job at a place called DePatie Freeling. And DePatie Freeling made the Pink Panther, the title sequences, the cartoons, everything about the Pink Panther. I think it was their franchise, maybe. And they just happened they were in Van Nuys and very close to ILM,
Mm.
which was also in Van Nuys at the time. And he said I should. He had gotten a job. He went and got a job there, and he goes, this is the kind of stuff that's right up your alley. You should apply because I know you're interested in this kind of stuff. So, in any case, I had applied, and I wanted to. I got an interview with John Dykstra and put together a demo reel, which completely fell apart when I showed it to him. But
Really? What, just the sprockets started ripping out of it or something? The perforation, sorry.
well, yes, you have to remember this isn't on videotape.
Yeah.
I took all of these pieces of 16 millimeter film that I was working with at CalArts, and put them together. And I bought this dumb little splicer that ran on batteries, and it said special diamond cut invisible splice in 16 millimeter, and so I thought, oh, this is great. And I went and put all of the splices together like that, and they all broke. But so I'm the guy who said, look, just give me a week. I'll work for you for nothing for a week, and if you have if I do a good job and you want to keep me on, great, and if not, then I'll just go away.
Quite a canny
Which I
thing
hate
to,
part of
to
having. Yes,
I was
Ed.
going to say, quite a canny thing for a young man to offer a potential employer. Let me work for a week and see how it goes and see what you think of me.
Well, it's what I wanted to do. It's exactly what I wanted to do. And at the time, besides going to CalArts, I was working at the theater down in Westwood as an usher because I like doing that. I don't think I actually made any money doing it, but it was work as an usher, eat popcorn, and work on special effects. That's kind of what I wanted to do at the time. So.
Hmm. So tell me about that moment you walk into that building in Van Nuys and in this week and a half, what were you doing within that week and a half? At what stage were things at this point?
Um, While they were building the models, the animation department was just coming together. The optical department was there, and they were all doing tests. I mean, basically, it was all like testing stuff, and when they said that. Now, if you saw the documentary, there's a this shot of the gun tower, and they said, well, that's the first shot that they did, and it's not really the first shot that was done. It was the first shot that George Lucas had approved, which there's a big distinction between. Because, for one thing, one of those tower shots like that was not a primary shot. Driving a primary shot until the end of the film. And before that, we were doing shots that were for the trailer, so like where Han and Luke and the princess are in the Millennium Falcon and they're being attacked by TIE ships. I mean, those were kind of the first shots put together because they were the first shots in the trailer. In trailer, like laser, handgun lasers that were being farmed out to some other optical houses. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
those were like the first shots, but they weren't approved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they were used.
Yeah. And what were you doing then in that first kind of couple of weeks there? Well, what happened after the week and a half? You obviously got the thumbs up.
Yeah, no, they decided to keep me on. I was basically at initially shooting wedges and things, different colors for the beams, the laser beams and stuff like that. Learning using the equipment, and stuff like that. So it's like they figured I mean, I did have a certain amount of knowledge on, how to do this stuff. And it wasn't like it was, completely foreign to me, which was a good thing. I was happy that I, you know, seemed to know at least as much as what everybody else was doing.
I think if you look back at a lot of films that kind of tried to replicate the look of Star Wars after its release in '77, one of the mistakes you often see is with the laser bolts, where there's no perspective on them at all, and they're just kind of straight lines. Whereas the stuff in Star Wars, some of which would have been done by you, I'm guessing.
I actually did the first perspective beams because I thought that at least what was being tested was just kind of like back and forth, no perspective on it. And I had suggested that we try that, and I actually got a very chilly response. So I decided to stay late one night and do a test, and took it to the lab myself, and it ran in dailies the next day, and Dijkstra liked it, so I wound up being the chief of that, at least for the time being. I also did a lot of experimenting with like doing shadows and light reflections, what they call interactive light now. I just thought that that was something that was needed.
Yeah, and what shots were they on? Can you remember?
Well, there's some in the trailer. My favorite shot, the one that I really liked doing, was in the trailer in the movie where the TIE ship's coming at the camera and it's firing, and there's some light reflections in there, and that was basically a shot where they said, "Here's a TIE ship coming at the camera. What can you do with it?" And I think in that case, the animation actually, became the moving factor in the shot.
Describe the process of doing something like that. Are you actually drawing on to film itself, and how are you doing that, and what are you using to do that? Because people today are just so used to going into After Effects, and
Yeah.
but you were doing a manual destructive process here as well.
Well, not actually drawing on the film, but for instance, the uh, original camera that we were working with was used in the Ten Commandments. Paramount, because it was VistaVision, and everything was being done in VistaVision, so it could be squeezed into a 4-perf anamorphic frame. So everything was basically VistaVision, and this camera was VistaVision, and it was it and the process of rotoscoping is that you use the camera as both a projector and a camera. You can project through the camera onto like a piece of paper. That's the simple way of doing it. This machine was a lot more complicated, but you use the camera as a projector. It projects down onto a piece of paper, and you can draw on that piece of paper. And if you don't move the camera and shoot back up through the same piece of paper, it stays in position where where you drew things. And a lot of it, I think, started, the effects of using backlit art and diffusion filters and things like that. It was basically the department. Once I started getting into like reflections and stuff, that was a little bit different, but that's basically what the department was doing.
And did you get to see people like Dennis Muren and Ken Ralston and John Dykstra doing a lot of the motion control rigs and things in the studio at the time as well?
Sure. I mean, I used to hang out. I would go and look at, if something cool was going on, I would go and check it out, because when Dykstra originally hired me, he said, "Well, we're not paying you that much, but this is a learning experience." So I took him at his word, and also shot some of the few pieces of 16 millimeter behind the scenes footage, because I was interested in getting that on film. And actually, before I went to work on Star Wars, I had met Dennis and Ken and Phil, along with Jim Danforth and Dave Allen. They were all working originally before Star Wars. They were all working at a place called CPC, which was Cascade Productions, and Cascade Productions did commercials. And I forget what I don't remember what Dennis was working on. Ken was doing the animation. He was animating some dancing bacon or something like that. And Phil was actually doing the statue for whatever it was, Sentinel Insurance or something like that. He was basically the sculptor, and then the night that the day I visited them, they were all getting together and they were going to show Dennis's copy of Equinox. So I went over to visit, and and Phil had done a test of this creature that actually wound up in the chess sequence. He had before they showed Equinox, he had showed a piece of animation that he did with this, and I thought it was really funny. I think it was Danforth who said, "Phil, I didn't know you could animate." Anyway, yeah, and that was one of the creatures that they used in the chess scene.
Yeah.
So
In speaking to some of these guys, it always strikes me that the people's roles weren't hugely defined. There was a sort of a blurring between different roles. So one day you might be doing one job, and the next day you might be asked to do something else. As a sort of core member of that crew, what are some of the other things that George asked you to do that weren't your primary role?
George was always looking for a way of making the land speeder float. And in today's digital environment, it's much easier. You can blend things almost seamlessly, completely seamlessly. Whereas in optical printing, you had to like hide things. So he was always looking for a way of making the land speeder float. And I'm not sure exactly who came up with this idea, but it was a great idea where you could put this. Someone at ILM came up with the idea that you put this Mylar mirror underneath the land speeder, like where the wheels are, and you tilt it in such a way that it reflects the ground. So we went up to this place called El Mirage, which is east of Los Angeles, and it had to settle for Tunisia, because they wanted to do some transition shots, going from one place to another, and it actually worked out pretty good. But I also, because I was the low man on the totem pole, you see, El Mirage was actually pretty close to where I was living, because I was still living at the dorm low man on the pole. They made me go get Mark Hamill, and he lived in Malibu. I think it was Malibu, around that area. It was a small house, I think, pretty close to the beach, which was totally in the other direction. So,
but this was after principal photography had finished and everything. Mark was kind of wrapped. Yeah.
It was after his accident. So he had a pin in his nose, which he got a kick out of, grossing out people by pushing it, and it would kind of come out this way, and then pushing it this way, and it would come out that way. And it's like, I don't know anybody who thought that was cool, but he did that. So yeah, we talked a little bit on the way to the setup. And also the other thing was that I didn't know how to drive a stick shift. So when we got there, I because it was an English car, the steering wheel was on the right-hand side. So I wound up being in the C-3PO suit and being the passenger, but I also had to drive. And I said, look, we got in the car, and it's like, I didn't even know what to do with a stick. And they pulled me out and took me around in, I think Bill Short had a BMW with a stick, and took me around for about half an hour to teach me how to shift gears, and then put me back in the car, and then and I guess because I had some experience putting on the suit, after the movie had totally wrapped, I helped Anthony Daniels put his footprint in Grauman's Chinese theater, uh, as well as some other things that wound up happening, with the suit. Um,
With the
but it,
suit, when you were in the car in the land speeder, then presumably you had just your own jeans on or something, and just the upper part of the suit on.
just the upper part of the suit. Um, but unfortunately, the car didn't have a firewall between my legs and the engine, so it was very hot. my legs my legs were very hot because the engine was practically right on top of them.
Hmm. And I guess with that mask on as well, it's all very constricting and difficult to see around and hear things properly, and all those things that Anthony Daniels had to put up with for many weeks. But you got to
The
experience
hard
that too.
the hard part was catching the costume under your armpits.
Yeah, because I guess by then it hadn't been
They were
refined. He
pinched.
he he talks like years later about it being far more refined and softer bits placed in where it needed softer bits. But back then it was quite sharp, I believe, quite pointy.
Yeah, no, there wasn't anything comfortable about it.
And were you kept on directly straight from there? You stayed staff through to Empire Strikes Back as well.
No, they there was a period of time, but I was hired back by Dykstra on the pilot for Galactica, so I
Right.
went to work on that, and actually I had met working in that department Harry Moreau, who had come off of Close Encounters, and he pretty much showed me all the independent jobs I could be doing, and I found that more interesting because I got to do more things with independent, special effects jobs. They normally didn't pay very well, but I really didn't like being kind of put into a uh, I don't know how you'd say it,
A
put in
pigeonhole, yeah.
pigeonholed.
Mm.
Um, because it's like what I liked was the opportunity to start from scratch with something and say, okay, now where am I going to go with this, and how am I going to be able to pull it off, and completely before digital. So you ought to whatever physically you could find to work with.
Was there a reluctance then to come back for Empire, or did you jump at the opportunity?
Um, Actually, I was kind of like losing my shirt in business, and because I was learning how to be a business person at the same time. But when they offered it to me, I thought, this is, yeah, I would like to do that. I would like to come up there. But at the time it was called Star Wars 2. It wasn't called 5 or
Hmm.
out of many. And I wanted, I had started my own business at the time because I was interested in learning more than just that department, and and so anyway, I went to work on Empire, and as the rotoscope animation supervisor, and then after that, I had actually planned to leave, and I did leave. And George had offered me he had offered me a job for life, and
Really?
yeah.
Why did you not take that job? because you wanted to have your own business.
And considered that having a business was much more difficult than actually doing the work, because and I can understand how George would want to make that part of the business easier on people so that they didn't have to, but I still saw that as a challenge. And also at the same time, when I guess when I was out of work for a period of time, for a small period of time, I thought if I had my own company, I'd be the last person I could fire. So, you know, I looked at that as like a safety issue, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a way of keeping myself employed, because the movies would. I mean, Star Wars went on. I think I worked on it for about a year or more, over a little over a year. I think some people worked on it longer than that, some people less, but you know, I hadn't yet been accustomed to having a job that actually had a deadline and had to finish. When you're working as an theater, it's just always going. So I wanted a business. He was still they were still very good to me. They still gave me work on other productions they worked on, and recommended me for other productions that weren't not necessarily being handled by them. So
Yeah, because ILM at that time, I guess, was kind of putting their feelers out a lot more to kind of. I mean, George says, I think in the Light and Magic documentary, that he had to find work for this group of people he'd assembled, and so they started taking on the effects work for other movies. And you worked on a bunch of movies in the early '80s, there, didn't you? Dragon Slayer and Wrath of Khan. Wrath of Khan's an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's kind of one of the early
yes.
onsets of digital with the Genesis planet and all of that. But these still the traditional methods being used. Did you find interest in that area at that time?
um you know I was still on like a mission to perfect optical printing, because to me, optical printing has always been I mean, forget about digital. Okay, we're still talking about the past.
Mm-hmm.
And optical printing to me was like where things either look good or look crappy. And I had seen lots of things that I did that I thought didn't come off very well. And I would blame it on the optical printing, because I didn't really have the option to be able to change anything about what I was doing. So that was my mission, was to improve optical printing. One thing I mean, where I did that first was on like Dragon Slayer, and couldn't pull off subtleties if you're doing optical printing with color. Well, I mean, it's a technical thing, but if you print off of a colored print, it looks very contrasty. And when something looks very contrasty, you can't make it look subtle, you know.
Mm.
So I was able to come up with some things on Dragon Slayer that made the on some of the animation effects. And that's what I was really aiming to do, because I really like the optical printer. I mean, as I look now, most of I would say most of the work that we've done has been digital, as opposed to optical. But I really enjoyed the optical printing a lot more. It was I guess something I grew up with, and something you know I really enjoyed, finding a way to tame it.
Yeah, well, what I find interesting about the optical world is that there's that real kind of combination of artistry and science as well, where you're trying to, create something wonderful for these fantastical movies, but you're having to have not only a keen understanding of how to tell a story with an effect, but also understand the science behind it.
Yeah. But also back then, like, when you come up with something that's really interesting, with something crazy, like I did um, the opening to John Carpenter's The Thing, and the spaceship was built by Susan Turner, and we actually shot the spaceship in VistaVision at Apogee, and then I took the spaceship element from Apogee, took it to ILM. ILM made a reduction element for me for perf, and as far as the title goes, I took the title. I painted the title on the back of a fish tank, and I filled a fish tank full of smoke. And behind the fish tank, I put I stretched a garbage bag plastic, black opaque garbage bag plastic over this frame, and behind that was a was like a light, and the garbage bag plastic held back the light, and you couldn't see anything until I touched the garbage bag plastic with a couple of matches, and matches like just started to burn the garbage bag plastic, and it revealed the titles. And you know, that's the kind of thing that I like, coming up with goofy stuff like that to try to make something look neat.
Thinking outside the box, or well, thinking outside the fish tank in this case. But yeah, it's a great effect, and it's very iconic, that look, isn't it? And I guess that effect has been replicated in many different ways. Whatever methods they've been using, I don't know, but it's certainly the first time I saw something like that.
Somebody online I watched, who kind of reverse engineer things in movies. They said, well, we're going to reverse engineer this shot for The Thing. And the one thing they didn't do was contain the smoke in a fish tank. They did everything else right, except that they just left the smoke everywhere. And it's like they had to, like, chase people out of the building because they got full of smoke. And I said, I wrote to him. I said, that's why I put it in a fish tank, because I'd already discovered that you make a big mess of smoke and kick a bunch of people out of the building and smoking it out. So, it was almost.
You'd solved that problem already.
Yeah.
When you worked on Return of the Jedi, I read about you having to come up with a new optical technique for was it for the lightsabers in the desert sequences?
Yes. Well, usually, these lightsabers, and there were other lightsabers in the film too, but the fortunate thing about them is that they all took place in fairly dark environments, like the Death Star or something. So you didn't necessarily need to worry about the background contaminating. When I mean contaminating, it's like if the background is bright, it goes through the light that you've added, and that light is no longer colorful. It's been bleached out by the background. So, so the first thing you would want to do is the stars, and then you print the spaceship on top of it. You add a black mat to hold out the background. The only problem is that the light from the sabers had kind of glowed, and it had a fuzzy edge. So you couldn't really make a black mat to hold out the background, because you'd either get a black fringe, most likely a black fringe, or if it was too small, you would get a bright fringe around it, which didn't right. So I came up with the idea of making colored mats, like green and blue colored mats, because on color print stock, and then putting them into the shot. So if there was any kind of a fringe, it would be a color. It would have color to it. And that is, pretty much how it worked out. You can't, this sort of thing doesn't matter anymore on digital, because you could just paint whatever you want on top of an image. But back then you had to worry about that.
And
that
was quite a leap, though, wasn't it? Then, and you were awarded with the SciTech Academy Award as well.
Well, I was awarded with the Academy SciTech Academy Award because I used a similar technique to fix some faded color film. I mean, that was when I was making Trinity and Beyond, and I learned that the certain years when they developed, when Kodak had put out Eastman color negative film, and some years were fading very quickly. I mean, well, like from the years 1957, 58, 59, the later 50s, Kodak had developed a a film that had a higher sensitivity, and it seemed to fade more easily. So I was trying to figure out how to fix that, because I wanted to use some of that footage in Trinity and Beyond. And the first thing that everybody tries is making separations, a red, green, blue separation. The blue separation looks flat as hell. So you want to try to make it contrasty. And when you do that, when you finally get a blue separation contrasted to the point where it looks right, it doesn't look, you can't, it just breaks up and gets all grainy. And I think that's what most people had tried. But I thought about what I did on Jedi, and I thought, well, I can make yellow mats, because what was actually going on was what they call crossover. The shadows were very blue and the highlights were very yellow. And if you try to fix the highlights being yellow, then the shadows get even bluer. And if you try to fix the blue in the shadows, then the yellow highlights get even yellower. So I had this idea that I could neutralize highlights so that they were so they weren't yellow, and then make this yellow matte that basically covered all of the shadow area, and bypack that with the film, and that actually worked pretty well. I mean, there were a few instances where, like if the image had been overexposed more than a stop and a half, I think it didn't work very well. It worked great if it was underexposed, but the problem was that by the time it got recognition, digital technology was already fixing that problem.
Interesting that it's a problem you had to solve on Return of the Jedi for one issue, and then it kind of evolved into this other idea to help restore film. I always find it interesting when things can be applied in completely different ways, but using very similar technology.
Yeah, well, that's something that Jonathan Erlin had said once, that maybe some of what we learn in special effects technology could possibly help in other film technologies. The only problem was that it was such a simple fix that nobody who was actually working in that technology was happy about it, because everybody had been trying something, and then I come along with this really goofy fix, and it's like, oh man, where did he come from?
That's it. Sometimes though, it's thinking, as I said before, outside the box, or using a simple technique that people would have discounted or not even thought of. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And well, congratulations on the award. I mean, it's a long time ago, but it's something to be very proud of, I would say.
Yeah, I always say that the Oscar for visual effects is an award that has to be given out. The award I got was one that if I hadn't done it, there wouldn't have been an award. So it's, to me, more special.
Yeah, that's true. And looking through your list of films on IMDb, which I know isn't always entirely complete, it seems that you did quite a bunch of work for the kind of Lucas stable over the years. The Ewok Adventure, The Battle for Endor. Ewok Adventure, that was the one that was called Caravan of Courage here in the UK.
Okay.
Explorers, which is a film I loved at the time, and Howard the Duck. When we spoke over email,
I only worked on one shot.
Yeah, that's what you said. But what was that one shot?
it was some kind of animation effect. I don't remember it too well, except that I remember I got up there because they wanted to meet me at 10 o'clock in the morning. And, and we pull out this shot and go over it. And I go, okay, what else? And they go, well, it's just this one shot. And I go, really? I had to come up here to go over one shot, And I go, well, what do I do? I'm not scheduled to go back until tonight. And they said, oh, I'll go enjoy San Francisco, take a boat ride on the bay, you know, do all the things that you never did when you were here.
I also see that you worked on Inner Space. Now, was it Dennis I was speaking to, or was it Ken? It might have been Dennis, who said he always hated the look of the Fantastic Voyage, and when Inner Space came along, it was a great opportunity for him to kind
Yeah,
of make it look better.
yeah, yeah. I was just kind of like doing fix-it shots and things, where they wanted stuff. I was kind of I thought that Rob Bottin should have been one of the five in that film, and I think he did too. But because I think he provided a lot of work on that film.
Mm,
I
mm.
think he's underappreciated.
Yeah, do you know, his work stands out massively. If you look through his catalogue of films, is somebody I'd very much like to be able to speak to. But
Yeah, I know and I liked I mean some of the films I worked on because I developed a working relationship with him too, and I really liked on on his um, on his stuff. And one time he called me, or I think I had called for him, and then a few days later he called back and I said, "Who is this?" And he goes, "It's Rob." I go, "No, it isn't. That doesn't sound like you." He goes, "No, it is." And I go, "Okay, well, there was only way I could tell." I said, I want to hear you laugh." And he has such a great laugh, It's like I can always tell if that's him or not by his laugh. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but uh, I think maybe after The Howling or something, there were some conventions, and I think some of the guys involved, Mike Fennell and Joe Dante, they said, "Do you want to come to the convention?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And then Mike Fennell said, "Well, when you come to the convention, could you dress up like Rob Bottin?" Yes, they couldn't get him to go to the convention. So I, um, so uh, that Halloween there was a party. Avco Embassy, I think, was putting on a Halloween party, and I put these 4-inch blocks on my feet and this long black wig, and he liked to dress in baggy kind of jackets, and I dressed up just like him, and I went to this party, and it was dark. You couldn't really see a lot, but because I had 4-inch heels on my feet, I was like the tallest guy in the room, which is like Rob. He's the tallest guy in the room. And Mike Fennell was there, and I could see him out of the back of my eye. I just looked back, and he could see me thinking I was Rob, and I would let him get like within a couple of feet of me, and then I would walk to the other side of the room, as if just ignoring him. And I did this a few times, because he just kept trying to work his way over to talk to Rob, who wasn't there, you know. But I just kept avoiding him until the end of the night. Surprise.
So you've played C3PO and Rob Bottin. I mean, there are two roles to die for.
Yeah, yeah,
um, I think you said in some of our initial emails that you probably worked on visual effects on over 300 movies.
yeah.
Have you ever thought about kind of writing a book or recording that in some way about the work that you've done? Because I think, one of the reasons I do this podcast is because I don't think Hollywood is actually is not actually very good at recording its own history. You've already kind of mentioned that all the stuff that you know and knew back then is redundant now, but it's all part of the process. It's all part of the history, and that's how people learn. And I think a lot of the people I've spoken to in the digital realm today still encourage people to go back and do things physically, so you get that kind of sense memory kind of stuff. I mean, obviously the optical printing side of things is very difficult to do now. I'm sure there's not much technology that's survived, but have you ever thought about trying to record some of your experiences other than, chatting to people like me?
Well, I have been writing them down as I go along. Have had some interesting experiences. I don't know if I mentioned this before to you. I used to do airbrushing a lot. You compress it out air so you get a CO2 container, right? A CO2 tank. And I would have to go get CO2. And the weirdest thing that ever happened to me was that one day it was hot. It was in the middle of the summer. I went and got a CO2, and I guess they must have filled it up a little bit too much. And this I didn't know, but I know now that there's like a safety seal. So if it's too if it's too, too pressurized, the safety seal will leak CO2 out of the tank so it doesn't blow up. But I had the tank in the back of my car, and it was like I was driving on Wilshire Boulevard, and there was like this whoosh, and then all of a sudden it's like everything around me was white, and the windows were freezing, and I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle of traffic, and I can't see a damn thing. It's like I'm in the middle of a blizzard. So it's like I just kept beeping the horn and just slowly trying to get over to wherever I think you know the curb is, to get out of the to get out of traffic, because I didn't know. For one thing, I didn't know what the hell happened. I eventually figured out it must have had something to do with the tank, but weird stuff like that.
Well, that's the thing that people working in the digital realm today never come across, is these, the fact that there is peril involved in doing things physically to create effects. I mean, the biggest peril is that your seat might collapse or your mouse might stop working.
Yeah. On the last day of getting something done,
Yeah.
You're trying to get something done, and the computer's not helping you.
Yes, quite. Yeah, I think we've all been there. Before we wrap up, because I think we've been talking for nearly an hour now, I also wanted to have a chance to talk to you a little bit about your films that you've made. When did you start making those, and can you kind of fill us in on what the subject matter is?
Sure. Well, actually, there's 6 of them now, and they're all on the atomic era, starting with Trinity and beyond. I had decided pretty much that I had this whole facility, this whole facility where I did optical printing and stuff. I could actually start putting a film together, because I had actually what actually set me off was going to talk to these people about the Barney movie. I think it was way in pre-production, and they were just talking to all the visual effects companies, and and they call you in and you talk to them and give them ideas. And when I left, they're going to give me this job. I just wasted hours of my time, the whole day, going to this place in El Monte or wherever it was, and talking to these people who weren't going to give me this job. So it's like that's when I started really disliking the industry, because I said, if I'm going to waste my time, I might as well try to get something out of it. So that's when I started my interest in that, doing that film and the others, because because I learned a lot about atomic history that I didn't know, in atomic photography, and there's a lot of interesting things that have gone on in physics land. I'm not learn about these things as I go along.
Where can people watch these films? Are they available still for people to see?
Yeah. They you can watch them on Amazon. You can. I mean, we still sell DVDs and a Blu-ray on Trinity beyond on our website, which is Atom Central, AtomCentral.com. The ones online are usually the most updated ones, because when I make a bunch of DVDs, you either have to start with 1,000 of them or something, and then when you get down to the last one, you got to order another 500, and so they usually aren't the most updated versions. But
Well, I'll certainly look out for them on Amazon, because I think it's a topic that I'd like to know more about. I appreciate you giving your time today, Peter, and it's been great to talk to you. And I hope one day, that book comes out, or maybe some other form. Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear some more of those stories.
Yeah, there's plenty of goofy stories.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation there with Peter Kuran. Again, sorry for the dropout at times, but I think it was still worth sharing what we were able to record. For the next episode, as I said in the intro, it will be a conversation between Justin Berger, my co-author on our Return of the Jedi Unauthorized Timeline book, and producer of Return of the Jedi, Jim Bloom. Jim was kind enough to do a lovely lengthy intro for our book, and very much look forward to chatting with Jim again, this time all about that last episode of the original trilogy. And that episode of the podcast will be up on or before the 25th of May 2023, ready for the release of the book on the 40th anniversary of the film. Then there'll be my conversation with composer Stu Phillips. We recorded that a couple of weeks ago now. Very interesting, very cool guy, 94 years old and sharper than me, I can tell you. Other episodes coming up are my conversations with production coordinator Mickey Herman, special effects supervisor Richard Vandenberg, VFX artist Charmaine Chan, and VFX supervisor Pablo Hellman. And recently I've also set up an interview with supervising sound editor Max Smith. Looking forward to that one as well. So plenty to come. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on the podcast. If I'm going to continue doing this, I really do need your help in getting it out there in front of more eyes and ears. So thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.